Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and procure lambs for your families, and slaughter the Passover victims. Then take a bunch of hyssop, and dipping it into the blood that is in the basin, apply some of this blood to the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and none of you will go outdoors until morning. For when the Lord goes by to strike down the Egyptians, seeing the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and not let the destroyer come into your houses to strike you down." The situation described in this reading from Exodus reminds me of when I was a kid and we had tornado warnings. We only had TVs and radios, broadcast television, and they only got their reports from the National Weather Service, who relied on a lot of folks from around the area to call in and tell them what was happening in the sky above them, whether they saw a tornado or not. Radar was there, but it wasn't the main method those days. So we would be playing outside, we'd see the clouds gather, and we'd hear the thunder, see the lightning, and then the siren would go off. When the siren went off, we had to go inside. We had to go to the basement. We had to stay away from windows, stay away from the west wall. To sit there, listen to the wind, listen to the thunder. We had to pray. We wanted God to divert the storm, to send it to the north or the south. Wanted God to keep those rotating clouds up in the sky. We prayed that God would spare our house from getting ripped apart by a tornado. And then the storm would pass. Things would be normal again. The situation of fear, not the same these days, when we can track everything on our computers, on our phones. But it's still a threat. It's still a time we have to let danger pass us by. There's not much we can do about it except take shelter. Life in those days was different for the ancient Hebrews. They had left the Holy Land a couple of centuries before due to droughts. They were living in a good place. They were living in the Nile Delta. They were well fed. They had regular crops. They had a wide variety of things to eat. But they were a despised minority. They were seen as a threat to their overlords. They were victims of injustice repeatedly by rulers that sought to control them, keep them in service. The passages from the Bible are the only record of this, so we have to take on faith what the Bible tells us. Egyptian histories don't say anything about a large group of foreigners leaving at any point. But we take on faith what's going on here. We see a community that's trying to hold together, keep its identity, keep its commitment to God, to what God means to them, their relationship with God. And they struggle against temptation, against a culture that diminishes them, that isolates them. This passage from Exodus is the first detailed blood ritual in the Bible. And this ritual is meant to be a model for them to follow. It marks them in their community. It marks them to anybody looking on. It protects them. Blood is key because blood sacrifices were the most important. And the blood of the individual was seen to carry their life force. It was given by God. It belonged to God. It was a sign of death as well. Blood spilled was a sign of death. When we look at this story and we read Father Schreiter's book, in chapter 1, Father Schreiter describes this situation and unpacks this as an overture to precious blood spirituality. It makes a lot of sense. And for those of you that don't know what an overture is, very briefly, it's a piece of instrumental music before an opera or a musical where they play all of the major themes to come. The point of the overture is to set a mood, to develop an expectation, to establish a relationship. And so as you look at this overture, the themes that Father Schreiter points out: the boundary between life and death. Blood is a place where life and death meet. And it's also where the struggle between life and death is at its most acute. We believe that God is at work in the blood, is at work on that margin, is at work in that place where death comes closest. We believe the power of God is shown more clearly at the boundary of life and death. Protection from the destroyer. It marks a safe place, just like the safe places we sought out, we seek out during tornado warnings. Safe places have another meaning in the time of COVID. That is another kind of waiting, and we're waiting to be delivered from an invisible adversary. Life becomes difficult. Ordinary life has been very much changed during the past year and a half, and we don't know when it will get back to normal. We hunger for life to get back to normal. But we seek to keep our community together. We seek to build a society in the midst of this struggle between life and death. And blood is the sign that God triumphs, that God will overcome someday. The next theme is the blood of an innocent lamb. It's ironic that the blood of a young innocent lamb is the best protection against the destroyer. We would expect to call the old and experienced, we would expect to call the superstars forward, the heroes. And yet, the blood of the innocent is the greatest protection, is the shield on the boundary between life and death. The suffering of the innocent also calls out the injustice of society. It calls us to ponder the injustice of the world around us and even the injustice within us. Blood in the Old Testament is always a sign, an outcry against the world's injustice. But it keeps us from being immobilized by our rage. It helps us remember that our protection doesn't come from our own efforts, but from God. The blood is what redeems us and nourishes our hope. And the fourth theme is a seal and a witness, a public act, painting your door with blood, a public act, Passover, even though it's held in people's houses. It is something that all can participate in, just like the Mass is a public statement. A Mass is a public statement of faith. A Mass is a public statement of faith in God's redeeming love in Christ, in Christ's blood. blood of the Lamb is a call to God who sides with the innocent, that sides with the innocent sufferer. Blood is a sign of that eternal struggle between death and life. Father Schreiter says that blood of the Passover becomes at once a seal of their solidarity with that God and with those who suffer, as well as a witness to God's saving even now. Jewish tradition calls for a repetition of the Passover every year because that protection was once. That protection needs to be invoked regularly. We need to remember. The Mass is repeated daily, and it is a seal and a sign. As Father Schreiter says, the blood on the cross of Christ becomes the great seal of God's commitment to us and witness to a redemption of suffering. It becomes a sign of solidarity in confrontation with the forces of the destroyer. And those who follow a spirituality of the blood are called to join in that solidarity against the destroyer, to witness the saving power of God made manifest in a special way among those bereft of power and resources. The first chapter of In Water and in Blood, the overture to the spirituality of the precious blood of Christ. It's a spirituality that calls us to the edge. It's a spirituality that causes us to remember that it's not our work that saves us, but our work that brings us into solidarity with God's promise, that brings us in solidarity with hope expressed on the boundary and with the people who are living close to the boundary of life and death. It's something I experience where I live. I live in a nursing home. Every day is a new gift. Every day is a new struggle. Every day is a day of hope. We're on the boundary here. There are many places where the boundary is in the world. In what we call the third world, in parts of our cities, in places where people are persecuted for who they are, for what they believe, where they stand. In the spirituality of the precious blood, we're called to remember God's love through Christ and to stand on the margins. There's more we can say about this chapter of In Water and in Blood, and will be said soon. Next Tuesday, we're going to release a video here at this very same place where we're going to expand on some of the things I talked about here. I'll be joined by a couple of other folks, one person very familiar to you all, and somebody new to us, new to our spirituality. Very excited about this conversation. And you can join the conversation as well. Please feel free to leave comments in the comments section below, or to contact us if you have something more extensive to say, or if you have an insight that you think we need to be aware of. So in the meantime, may God bless you, may God give you peace, and may we all find redemption in the precious blood of Christ.